RTN week number 3 will forever be known as the week where the meta finally settled down, the cream truly rose to the top, and we got our triangle meta. Is what my intro would have been if that would have been the case, but it wasn't the case because the meta continues to just be whatever it feels like that day. If you want to play Dromai, apparently it's just Dromai time. Let's talk about it. So here are the week 3 results of the classic constructed Road to Nationals across the world, and just like everybody expected, Dromai now has the most wins on the week, followed by KO and Azalea. I went and played in an RTN 2 weeks ago. It was I think it was week 1, or maybe it was week 2. I can't remember. Everything's blended together at this point. But I played aggro Dromai, and I mentioned that it felt quite good into the majority of the meta, and particularly the aggro version felt fine enough into KO, and I played 2 KOs on the day. One lost the other. And it felt good. It's a good solid pick, I think, for the majority of the decks in the meta. And I'm not the only person that thinks that and found some amount of success on it. I did not win an RTN, so I cannot put my claim to fame on that. Unfortunately, that's not how that goes for me, but a lot of people did at 14 wins. Dromai has a lot of answers to the meta, and when you look at what heroes are kind of being run out there and played, she feels pretty solid across the board into just about all of them. There's not a ton of heroes that you just look across the board from and go, yeah, this one doesn't feel good. But the ones that are there are certainly lurking, which we'll talk about here in a moment. KO, I would not necessarily describe as one of those. I feel like KO is a tough matchup for Dromai, but because KO sometimes relies on a little bit of variance, we'll put it that way, with regards to cast bones and some discards with Wild Ride. If you're playing the more aggressive version, the Bear Fangs as well, you can luck into some really heavy tempo that your opponent just can't catch back up with. But when it's humming, that deck is humming, and that's why it's been so consistent. We'll look at the week to week here in just a moment, but KO sitting there with 10 wins, incredibly consistent. Azalea climbs way up from the last few weeks, comes way back up, hits 8 wins, and I think if people are looking for a way to take KO down a peg, and I would also say Victor down a peg, Azalea kind of does that because she has on-hit effects that really just make the game incredibly painful for, basically everybody, period, end of story. If Azalea gets rolling and starts dominating arrows, there's just about nothing you can do to stop it. But Katsu also puts the pedal down. If you're looking for a deck that races KO and a deck that makes it really uncomfortable to play against from just about every other perspective, Katsu is the answer. And I will say this, I don't like your chances from a Katsu perspective into Dromai, unless you're playing like really aggressive Dromai and you get off to a good start and you just kind of keep the Katsu off. I don't personally like it. Now, I was talking to a couple of different people who feel a little bit differently, but for me, it doesn't feel good from the Dromai side when you're trying to build a board of dragons and Katsu is able to kind of cut them down and land their Mask of Momentum triggers. And Katsu is definitely making its way in this meta, has not really dipped down. The other hero that hasn't really fallen off is Kano. Everyone complained week 1 and prior to RTN season that Kano was going to, just be super toxic and pervasive in the meta, and then people thought it would fall off with the introduction of, more AB. The more people play Kano and the more people get better at Kano, Kano will continue to be within this meta, but I think that's kind of where we've gone. If you're looking at this board, that is a lot of freaking heroes that have earned Living Legend points. That's a lot of points being given out to a bunch of different heroes, which means that the lion's share isn't going to one hero and everyone's really kind of dipping their toes in. Kano picking up 6 wins is not the biggest, flashiest thing in the world, but it means that a fringe hero up to this point has the capacity to just be okay, be good, and win smaller tournaments, and that's pretty cool. Kasai, literally the poster child for consistency, and Victor falls off greatly from last week and kind of levels back down. I think some people were looking at that going, okay, if Victor is what we are targeting, how do we do that? We bring some of these other decks, and spoiler alert, looks like it worked. I mean, Dromai if you're Victor, I'm gonna put it this way. If you're Victor and you sit down from the table to a Dromai player, you're well, I don't know. You may be washing your hands of that matchup quite quickly because it doesn't go well. The aggro version of Victor might be a bit better. I will say that the aggro version does probably feel a little bit better playing pummels, playing attacks, trying to basically do what Bravo does. So that does feel a little bit better. And I do want to point that out. Bravo does have a win, but falls off a good bit as well on this board. Dorinthia comes back up, 4 wins, and Sir Bolton falls way down in comparison to the previous week. And then just this smattering of other heroes. Every other hero is almost represented, across the board here. Bravo, Levia, 2 Levia wins, which you can actually check out. One of them, it was Ethan Van Sant, and he streamed the entire affair. It was pretty awesome. I watched the end. Congrats, Ethan. That was pretty sick. Prism picks up another win. Reinar picks up some stuff. Viserai decides to just show up. Clearly, he was just sitting back, exploring Erathiel, deciding not to show up, but he finally punches his ticket and gets some more Living Legend points, which is pretty exciting. Dash shows up, but falls way off. One of the biggest losers of this RTN season, perhaps, is Mechanologist. Phi shows up, and Azuri carved its way to the top at 1 RTN. But let's look at the week-to-week data here. This is by far the most fun RTN season that we've had. It's so much fun to look at the data and watch this go back and forth. Like, for example, Levia here. I just had this one open from looking at it previously. Levia goes from week 1, 1 win, week 2, 7 wins, week 3, 2 wins. It's like just a ping pong. That's so fun to look at. Like some of the other big drops that you would maybe expect, maybe not expect. Week 1, we have 1 win for Bolton. Then he goes all the way up to 8 wins, then comes back down to earth with 4 wins. I would attribute this probably to the maybe increased number of Dromai players, and Dromai being just pretty good. From my experience, Dromai feels pretty solid into Bolton because it does have some non-attacks that can just throw out there and just basically end their turn in a lot of respects. Azalea, look at this. This is really interesting. Azalea starts off really weak and then climbs in week 2 for 5 wins, and then climbs again for a massive 8-win finish in week 3. That's a big winner. Bolton, like I showed, Bolton falls down. Bravo kind of stays consistent. I believe this is correct. It's 7 wins, but I have to double check this. I'm not so sure if Bravo had 7 wins. I don't think that's correct, actually. Hold on. What is not a consideration at this point to me is the possibility of playing Dash right now. That doesn't feel good. That's a pretty big dip, and maybe there's some psyops going and people are just moving off of Dash, but I don't know, man. It doesn't seem really good right now to be a Dash gamer. But maybe I'm wrong. Tell me in a comment below if Dash is just downward trending or if it's just a miss there. Dorinthia was the other one that I wanted to mention because there's this big drop off, as you can see, down to 1 win and then a climb back up with 4 wins. I think this number is actually too low. I would expect more Dorinthia wins going forward into week 4. I could be wrong, but I feel like Dorinthia feels pretty solid overall. I would also say this, that I think Dorinthia itself has a better matchup into Dromai than Kasai, and I think Dorinthia has far more tricks up her sleeve than I think people give her credit for, so that's maybe why I'm a little high on the hero. But the big question mark is whether or not this number that climbed and doubled essentially from 7 to 14. Week 1, week 2 is very consistent and then spiked for 14. Is this just a sign of things to come? Is Dromai just the toxic deck of the week? Is Dromai just the truth? And it's the solution to the metagame that everyone has to protect for and tech for and, be ready for? I don't know. But week 3, it certainly seems like it put up results. Dromai is certainly good in general. Phi way down, just not doing much at all, which is very interesting because Katsu, you compare, that's Kasai, you compare Phi to Katsu, and Katsu's just on the up and up. And so you would look a couple years ago, you would look when Phi released and be like, he's a strict upgrade to Katsu, but now Katsu is showing up and showing out in comparison, and that is a big deal. I don't want to skip over Kano because he does make a bit of a resurgence as we see, moving up a little bit. And then Kasai, I mentioned it at the beginning when I talked about her. She is consistent. And weirdly enough, she actually gets one more win than previous weeks into a meta where apparently a lot of Dromais won out. And that is not a good matchup for Kasai. Dromai is not a good matchup for Kasai. And that's another thing why Dromai is just pretty good right now. If a lot of people are playing Kasai and other good matchups are Dromai, it makes a ton of sense. Maybe we just continue to go through KO, though. This is a KO meta, and everything funnels through KO. I mean, he's literally climbing. How weird is this? It's so easy to like look at these big winners, like Victor in week 2 and Dromai in week 3, and then KO's just here, racking up those living legend points. I don't know, man. I know this is just RTNs, but like that plus the battle harden win plus more battle hardens and more, you know, like pro quests and you know, even then callings and bigger pro tours. KO seems like he's going to speed run this thing, man. It looks like he is going to speed run through the living legend process. He's quite good. Levia dips way back down after a spike from week 2, so she's definitely a loser in that respect, but still putting up a few results. Prism dips down a little bit, which is not to be, or which is, I guess, should say to be expected, because if more Dromais are lurking, it's just an easy matchup for Dromai in a lot of respects as well. And then no other big jump outs. I think we should look at Victor. Victor comes down, gets sort of knocked down a peg. It's the lowest amount of wins that we've seen for Victor, but it's still 6, which is still incredibly respectable across the board. And we should, of course, look at Azuri with a win this week. And finally, Viserai. That is the graph everyone wanted to see right there. We go from nothing to something. That is an infinite growth. We grew infinitely from week 2 to week 3. Congratulations to all Viserai players everywhere. You got your boy some living legend points, and I'm super happy. So if you were looking, and look, this is the ridiculous graph. I could make this ridiculous graph giant. There you go. There's a ridiculous graph of all the movement. Again, I have all the week 4. I'm ready for week 4 on this graph, but you can see all the random movements, which is kind of hilarious. You've got like this bounce and all of this sort of thing. But if you're looking for a hero to take out in this final week of the season, I don't mind Azalea right now. I know it's a kind of a tough Dromai matchup sometimes, but I don't mind her too bad. She feels pretty solid. If you're looking to prey on Dromai, I'm just saying, I suck at playing against aggro Bravo as a Dromai player. I suck at this. I need to personally practice that matchup a lot more because I am not good. I struggle into this matchup. Tell me if this is a good matchup for Dromai, because I've put a lot of hours on Dromai. I would consider myself a fairly good Dromai player, and this is just atrocious to me. Just an atrocious matchup. So maybe you take Bravo for a spin and try to run him on out there if you're trying to prey on that. If you don't believe in that, then I don't know. You got to find something that you might think better to go into Dromai. Maybe you pick Kano. Maybe you decide that Kano's just going to combo them off and blow them out of the water. You could even play one of the brutes. I think technically Levia doesn't feel terrible into Dromai. Where is he? Where's the guy? Reinar. We didn't talk about Reinar. Reinar came down a little bit, but I would say Reinar is also pretty solid into a Dromai. And then, of course, the brute that is sitting atop the leaderboards, KO also feels like a solid race. It's not terrible for Dromai. I think this is probably like a 40-60 from the Dromai perspective if you're playing more aggressively. But that being said, if you're playing it from the KO side and you're playing a more measured approach and trying to just throw big damage, it feels pretty good, I would imagine, from that perspective. So that might be what you take into week 4. But man, we got some stuff coming in week 4. The ultimate, no, not penultimate, but the ultimate, the final week of RTN season. And after that, it's big tournament after big tournament. Pro Tour is coming up. So we're coming down to the wire to see if this meta ever actually settles, or if Pro Tour is just going to be just this bonanza of heroes. If you're enjoying this type of content, this like weekly coverage that I'm trying to bring for the RTN season, make that number go slightly higher, because when it does, we change this to a 9, and 19,000 is cooler than 18,000, but only if you're part of it. Only if you're part of it. It's not as cool if you're not part of it. So, you know, just think about that. Just keep that in mind. Okay, bye.